Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun was so nervous his throat was completely dry. After a long moment passed, he carefully sent his divine sense back into the soul-hoarding pagoda and inched it toward the sealed area. From the perspective of his divine sense, the sealed area looked like it was covered with countless cracks, as though the slightest nudge would break it. Bai Xiaochun remained there hesitantly, analyzing the faint pulses of energy which occasionally emerged from the other side. I'm finished. Kaput. I've caused another disaster. Depressed, he realized that it wasn't an option to just run away, and that he really needed to take a look to understand what he was dealing with. Exercising utmost caution in his control of his divine sense, he slowly sent it into one of the cracks. He didn't send much in, only a teeny bit, but that was enough to give him a general idea of what was inside the sealed area. Shockingly, there was a dimension inside. It was an empty space filled with gray light, in the depths of which could be seen an old man sitting there cross-legged in meditation. His face was a mass of wrinkles, and he had no hair. Shockingly, he was being tightly restrained by 999 chains formed from magical symbols. His aura vastly surpassed that of a diva, and to Bai Xiaochun, he looked like some sort of god or deity. The mere pressure emanating off of him left Bai Xiaochun trembling. Is he a demigod? Bai Xiaochun thought, barely able to breathe. What he was seeing via his divine sense almost defied belief. Fearful of attracting the old man's attention, he carefully began to retract his divine sense. At the same time, he decided that he didn't really want this soul-hoarding pagoda after all. However, it was in that same moment that the old man's eyes snapped open to reveal light as bright as a shining sun. At the same time, he suddenly transformed into a crimson, three-headed python. Bai Xiaochun couldn't hold back from letting out a shriek. Spare me, senior, he wailed as he pulled his divine sense back. However, a moment later, he stopped his divine sense from moving. Eee, he murmured. It was only at this point that he realized the chained old man didn't seem corporeal. Rather, he was partially translucent, almost as if he weren't complete. Even more telling was that his gaze, despite being fiercely powerful, was somewhat blank, almost as if he weren't conscious. He's a discarnate soul? Bai Xiaochun gasped and looked a bit closer. A discarnate demigod soul. After confirming what he was looking at, Bai Xiaochun carefully retracted his divine sense. Then, he sat there, heart-pounding, looking at the crystalline soul-hoarding pagoda he held in his trembling hands. If there are diva souls, then it makes sense that there would be demigod souls. Although the soul in the pagoda is discarnate and incomplete, it still counts as a demigod soul. Clearly, it didn't originally belong to a cultivator, but rather, to a demigod-level beast. It must have been some almighty entity in ages past, which was killed by some cultivator. Its discarnate soul was then sealed, either by whoever killed it, or perhaps even by itself. Whatever exactly occurred, it ended up in this soul-hoarding pagoda. Bai Xiaochun licked his lips at the thought of how precious this treasure was that he had acquired. Unable to hold back his curiosity, he sent his divine sense back into the pagoda to study it further. The following day at noon, he finally finished his inspection, whereupon his eyes shone with enlightenment. It really is an unconscious discarnate soul that was fused into the pagoda. If the pagoda were to be destroyed, the sealed soul would also be destroyed. However, that would simultaneously result in a blast of destructive energy that would probably kill even a diva, or at least inflict serious injuries. This thing is essentially a disposable magical item. The soul-hoarding function is just a secondary feature, or perhaps something to disguise its true function. Bai Xiaochun was completely shaken, and couldn't even imagine what entity would be able to turn a discarnate demigod soul into a disposable magical item. It almost didn't seem real that he could so casually acquire an item that would be threatening even to a diva. However, that wasn't necessarily a good feeling. More like a hair-raisingly terrifying one. Was it really a coincidence? He thought, recalling everything that had led up to him being teleported out into the wildlands. The more he thought about everything, the more it seemed like something fishy was going on. After a bit more thought, he put the soul-hoarding pagoda away and then summoned the two soul cultivators. They quickly rushed into his immortals cave and bowed in greeting, nervous about what was going on. Looking at the two soul cultivators with eyes that flashed like lightning, he cut right to the chase and asked, "Where did you get this soul-hoarding pagoda?" In order to make sure they didn't lie to him, he cracked open his heaven-span Dharma eye just a bit so that he could sense any changes in their auras and fluctuations. The soul cultivators were trembling under the might of the pressure weighing down on them, and didn't dare to hold anything back, they went on to tell him everything about the soul-hoarding pagoda in extreme detail. As it turned out, the pagoda was an ancient legacy heirloom in the Black Mountain tribe. Not even the two soul cultivators were really sure of its origins. After all, most savage tribes in the wildlands would have some object left behind by a founding ancestor. Some would be incredibly valuable, while others would be relatively insignificant. After hearing this, Bai Xiaochun called over the leaders of the savages in the tribe and asked some detailed questions. In the end, he dismissed everyone and sat there, frowning. Clearly, the soul-hoarding pagoda was nothing more than something passed down from generation to generation in the Black Mountain tribe. It, like other similar legacy items, had been around for such a long time that no one knew much about where it came from. He still didn't feel confident based on what he knew, though, so he went back to the leaders of the savages and asked to see the other things left behind by their ancestors. After examining them all closely, he couldn't find any useful clues. Eventually, he was forced to abandon his search for information about the origin of the soul-hoarding pagoda. Late that night, he stood outside of his immortals cave, studying the sky, the lands, and the mountains. Eventually, his eyes began to shine brightly. I hope I'm just overthinking things. Well, in any case, this soul-hoarding pagoda can at least be a powerful trump card. It's too bad I can only use it once, though. Sighing, he put the matter aside and stopped thinking about it. A few days later, he chose to leave the Black Mountain tribe. Upon his departure, all of the savages kowtowed, their eyes filled with awe and reverence. The two soul cultivators behaved similarly. Bai Xiaochun looked around, heart swelling at how popular he was. Back in his home village, everyone had gathered to see him off with great fanfare. It was the same in the Spirit Stream sect, the River-defying sect, and of course Sky City in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. Now here he was in the wildlands, where the Black Mountain tribe was similarly seeing him off with great fanfare. A moment later, he swept the crowd with divine sense to make sure that none of them had any gongs or drums hidden in their clothing, after which he was convinced that they were sincerely seeing him off. You're all dismissed, he said with the wave of his hand. Then, he stuck his chin up and strode off, looking as grand as possible. Zhou Yixing followed close behind, his eyes shining with determination. He had long since vowed to follow this Grand Master Bai wherever he went. Of course, he continuously cast vigilant glances at the person who was walking next to him. That person was none other than Bai Xiaochun's other follower, Li Feng. Li Feng could see Zhou Yixing glancing at him, and it made him just as vigilant. Considering that this Grand Master Bai hadn't driven him away, it indicated his approval. Therefore, Li Feng knew that at the moment, his greatest competition was none other than the damnable Zhou Yixing. The three of them proceeded along for a bit before Zhou Yixing finally couldn't take it anymore. Spinning, he glared at Li Feng and shouted, "What are you following us for? Screw the hell off already." Then, he turned and bowed to Bai Xiaochun at the waist, plastering onto his face a fawning expression that he had been practicing lately. "Grandmaster," he said, "this guy is up to no good. He's obviously following us because he has some sort of nefarious plan." Bai Xiaochun gave a non-committal grunt, but nothing more. Taking out a map, he checked to see which direction Giant Ghost City was. Li Feng looked over scornfully at Zhou Yixing as he clasped hands and bowed to Bai Xiaochun. "Please don't misunderstand, Grandmaster. Your humble servant has no such intentions. Because of my deep reverence for you, I sincerely wish to be your follower." Li Feng was telling the truth. He wanted so much to be Bai Xiaochun's follower that he almost had to hold back from grabbing his leg so that he wouldn't be sent away. However, Bai Xiaochun didn't pay much attention to him. Instead, he just turned to leave. Zhou Yixing, on the other hand, felt wonderful. Casting another glare at Li Feng, he hurried after Bai Xiaochun, his expression more fawning than ever. Li Feng was getting very, very nervous. After all, this Grandmaster Bai was a terrestrial necromancer, the most powerful necromancer Li Feng had ever met. The benefits of being a follower of a person like that defied description, and Li Feng knew that if he didn't seize this opportunity, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Aware that he had to do something to make himself valuable, he quickly cried, "Wait for me, Grandmaster Bai. I can be of a lot of use. For example, when you need souls, I can go looking for them for you. I can also." Bai Xiaochun paused mid-stride. After all, the things that Li Feng was saying made sense. As for Zhou Yixing, his heart was starting to pound with anger. Back before Bai Xiaochun had proved to be a terrestrial necromancer, he had felt that being his follower was somewhat of an insult. But now things were completely different. As far as he was concerned, Bai Xiaochun was almost like a diva. Zhou Yixing had done a lot of boot-licking to try to get Li Feng kicked away, only to have him shamelessly offer to do the same things that he himself was responsible for. I can do that too, he shouted, worried that Bai Xiaochun would agree. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times but maintained his calm. He could tell that these two viewed each other as competition, and the truth was, he was actually pleased by that. Without saying anything, he continued along. Feeling a bit better, Zhou Yixing glared over at Li Feng and pondered how he would stomp him to death if his cultivation base were unsealed. Li Feng couldn't just sit around and let Zhou Yixing act like this. Turning anxiously toward Bai Xiaochun, he raised his voice and said, Grandmaster Bai, I know a place where you can get a huge amount of souls. So do I. Zhou Yixing shouted immediately. I know lots of places like that. I can concoct soul medicine for you, Grandmaster. Li Feng said, I'm at the peak of the Master Necromancer rank, so I can make plenty of soul medicine to keep you safe, Your Majesty. I can concoct soul medicine too. Zhou Yixing said through gritted teeth. You're pushing things too far, Zhou Yixing. I know a place where you can get Heavenspan river water. That stuff is incredibly valuable. Even a single drop can get you tons and tons of soul medicine. Can you match that, Zhou Yixing? Li Feng shouted. If Zhou Yixing were back home, he could definitely do that, but here, there was no way. Bai Xiaochun's eyes brightened. He had been aware that Heavenspan river water was rare in the wildlands, and that it was valuable, but he had never really put much thought into exactly how valuable it would be. Seeing that Zhou Yixing appeared to be at a loss for words, Li Feng started to get excited, and immediately began to list out all his selling points in the hopes that he could get Bai Xiaochun's attention. I know somewhere you can get a diva soul. I can gather all kinds of information from the area. I can. Eyes bloodshot, Zhou Yixing was just about to offer a retort when Bai Xiaochun suddenly stopped and turned around. Then, Zhou Yixing's heart began to pound as he realized that Bai Xiaochun was staring at Li Feng. Did you just say that you know the location of a diva soul? Bursting with excitement at Bai Xiaochun's reaction, Li Feng immediately clasped hands and bowed deeply. Grandmaster Bai, your humble servant absolutely has some information about a diva soul. According to the rumors, the giant ghost king himself has one. In addition to him, each of the 3 great necromancer clans within Giant Ghost City territory also has one. Bai Xiaochun frowned. From what he could tell, this information might as well be a complete fabrication. Zhou Yixing was delighted to see Bai Xiaochun frowning, and decided that he had to counterattack. HMPH. The giant ghost king is a demigod expert. How could you possibly just take a diva soul from him? And as for what you said about the necromancer clans, that's pure speculation. Li Feng stared at him coldly for a moment, then chuckled. Putting a very respectful expression onto his face, he looked at Bai Xiaochun and said, how could I possibly do anything to deceive Grandmaster Bai? Obviously, the diva soul possessed by the exalted giant ghost king is not something to go after. As for the necromancer clans, there are 2 who I can't say for certain have a diva soul. But one of them does. I'd stake my life on that fact. I was once a vassal in that very clan, and during one of their ceremonies, I had the honor of seeing that diva soul with my own eyes. It bore the semblance of sandy soil, and instantly caused incredible pressure to weigh down in the entire area. As soon as Bai Xiaochun heard Li Feng's complete description, his eyes sparkled. Diva souls were precious treasures in the wildlands just like they were in the lands of Heavenspan. They were the type of thing that few people could ever lay eyes on, and as such, few people knew what they would look like. However, Li Feng's description matched the description exactly. If he's telling the truth, then that means he saw an earth-type diva soul. I already have fire, wood, and water. I'm just missing metal and earth. Bai Xiaochun's heart was palpitating in eagerness. Which clan are you talking about? Bai Xiaochun asked, his eyes sparkling. Li Feng hesitated for a moment, but considering that his chance to be Bai Xiaochun's follower was at stake, he finally said, the Bai clan, on the east outskirts of the city. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened in surprise. The clan Li Feng had just mentioned sounded very familiar, and when he realized why, his jaw dropped. The east outskirts of the city, he thought. 3 great necromancer clans, the Bai clan. Isn't that the clan Bai Hao came from? Such thoughts got his heart pounding. But a clan like that, a great clan attached to Giant Ghost City, they must have a diva patriarch. Bai Xiaochun licked his lips, and yet, was still hesitating. However, he absolutely had to get more diva souls, and considering that he was already masquerading as Bai Hao, it would probably make things easier. As he hesitated, the nervous Li Feng began to give more information about the Bai clan. As far as he was concerned, even offending the Bai clan would be worth it if he could be Bai Xiaochun's follower. Although he had served at the Bai clan as a vassal, he had never noticed Bai Hao during that time. After all, Bai Hao was only an early foundation establishment and wasn't considered an outstanding member of the clan. It would only be natural for Li Feng, a master necromancer, to ignore him. Bai Xiaochun's mind spun as he considered the matter for a long moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and thought, I might not succeed in the end, but I should at least give it a shot. After all, I do have my demigod pagoda. Even if my identity gets exposed, I shouldn't be in too much danger. At the same time, his anger toward Mistress Red Dust smoldered. After all, if it weren't for her, he wouldn't need to get diva souls to step into the nascent soul stage. It's all the fault of that shrew Mistress Red Dust. Once I'm awesome enough, I'll definitely teach her a lesson. And the same with Chen Hichan. Finally, he made his decision, and formally agreed to let Li Feng be his follower. With that, the three of them flew off in the direction of the Bai clan. Along the way, Bai Xiaochun reviewed the bone slips he had found in Bai Hao's bag of holding, and also thought about the circumstances surrounding Bai Hao's death. Obviously, returning to the clan as Bai Hao would probably cause something of a stir. Very well, Bai Hao. If I get a chance, I'll figure out who's responsible for your death and get revenge. A few days later, they were closing in on the Bai clan. Obviously, it wouldn't do to take Li Feng and Zhou Yixing with him, so at a certain point he stopped and arranged for them to stay in the vicinity and work on their cultivation, ready to come the instant he called for them. He dropped his cultivation base from the great circle of core formation down to where Bai Hao's had been, in early foundation establishment, and also flew a bit slower than before, doing everything he could to make himself look like Bai Hao should. He even put a taciturn expression onto his face. Bai Hao was a bastard son, so the clan probably doesn't care about him very much. It only made sense to him that Bai Hao wouldn't look very happy to come back to the clan after almost being killed. This area was considered the outskirts of Giant Ghost City, and all of it was controlled by the Bai clan. It was a huge area, populated to the point where it was essentially a huge city. The city was violet, and almost looked like it had been imprinted into the earth itself from above. The city wall was formed by statues of dragon snakes, which formed together to make 4 huge gates, the entrances to the clan. There was clearly a spell formation at work, which emanated terrifying pressure that both filled the Bai clan and made it stand out among the lands that surrounded it. As soon as Bai Xiaochun entered the vicinity of the city, he felt eyes on him from all directions, although no one looked at him for too long. As for the power of the spell formation, it caused his heart to tremble. The Bai clan definitely has a diva patriarch. Am I still me? Bai Xiaochun thought. Even he could tell that he had changed in a fear-inspiring and dangerous way. There's a diva patriarch here. I can't believe I'm actually attempting to steal a diva soul right out of the tiger's mouth. He rubbed his eyes a bit, but no tears came away. He really was at the point where he wished he could cry, but there were no tears to shed. Inwardly, he sighed. There was no question that a younger version of himself wouldn't have entered this place even upon the threat of being beaten to death. Yet, here he was, taking the initiative. It's all the fault of Mistress Red Dust and Chen Hichan. They're forcing me to do this. Damn it, when I get angry, I frighten even myself. No matter how he sighed, though, there were no other options available. Settling his thoughts, he tried to make himself look even more taciturn as he headed into the city. The Bai clan is one of the 3 great necromancer clans attached to Giant Ghost City. Of course they have a protective spell formation. It's hard to say whether or not the spell formation will check whether people have the blood of the clan in their veins. And it's also hard to say whether or not my mask will be able to deceive it if it does. I'm guessing it can. Bai Xiaochun proceeded forward nervously, prepared to flee in an instant if necessary. More and more gazes seemed to pass over him, until he was roughly 300 meters away from the city entrance. At that point, the extremely lifelike dragon snake statues opened their eyes and looked in his direction. Their sinister gazes were coupled with a terrifying aura that left Bai Xiaochun certain that if they decided he wasn't a member of the Bai clan, and tried to enter uninvited, that he would be struck with lightning-like destructive power. Bai Xiaochun stood there thoughtfully for a few breaths worth of time, then walked forward, entering the perimeter of the clan spell formation. Almost immediately, Bai Hao's identity medallion in his bag of holding began to glow with a soft light. At the same time, his mask unleashed imperceptible fluctuations that completely fooled the spell formation, ensuring that it believed him to be Bai Hao, and not Bai Xiaochun. As soon as he entered the perimeter of the spell formation, the gazes which had been resting on him vanished, and the eyes of the statues grew dark. Then, a creaking sound could be heard as the huge main gate slowly opened. A middle-aged man walked out who was in the great circle of chi condensation. He had his hands tucked into the opposite sleeves of his robe, and was extremely gaunt. Eyes anything but kind, he frowned as he looked Bai Xiaochun up and down. Bai Xiaochun was finally relaxing a bit now that he had passed the first step of entering the Bai clan. Steeling himself, he headed toward the main gate. However, the middle-aged man quickly stepped in front of him, scorn written on his face as he coolly said, "Well, you're back, young master Bai Hao. Did you forget the madam's orders? Bastard sons are only allowed to enter through the side door. I can't believe you triggered the clan spell formation and even forced the dragon snake gate open. You've obviously forgotten your place. This gate is not for the likes of you to enter." Bai Xiaochun looked over at the man with a slight frown. He had been aware that Bai Hao wasn't well liked in the clan, but would never have guessed that even a lowly gatekeeper would treat him with such scorn. That indicated there was more to Bai Hao's low standing in the clan than Bai Xiaochun understood. This is blatant humiliation, he thought. When the sharpness of Bai Xiaochun's gaze stabbed into the gatekeeper's eyes, his mind trembled. It felt as if an intense coldness had suddenly gripped his mind and dragged him into the dead of winter. Shocked, he didn't dare to keep looking into Bai Xiaochun's eyes, and even subconsciously stepped out of the way to make room. Bai Xiaochun walked past, his face expressionless. It was only after he entered the gate and walked off that the gatekeeper recovered. How could Bai Hao's gaze be so intense? He muttered. It wasn't like that before. After entering the clan itself, Bai Xiaochun began to simply stroll around. The place was large, but it was a clan, so there weren't things like stores and shops. There were only mansions belonging to the various bloodlines of the clan. Everything was luxuriously decorated, complete with ornamental rocks and trees. Members of the clan walked about here and there, and some flew about overhead. Overall, it was a bustling place. Before he could get very far, a young woman dressed like a servant appeared up ahead, walking toward him as she talked with a friend. When she saw Bai Xiaochun, her eyes flashed with scorn, and she snorted coldly. Is anyone even awake at the Department of Visitor Affairs? Apparently, they'll let any cretin through the gates. With that, she walked past. Bai Xiaochun was just about to glare back at her angrily, but restrained himself. Just deal with it, he thought. After all, I'm not really Bai Hao. Taking a deep breath, he looked over his shoulder at the servant girl and then continued on his way. As he explored the city, he encountered quite a few servants, all of whom seemed surprised to see him. However, each one had looks of scorn and disdain in their eyes as well. Many of their looks seemed too exaggerated to be sincere, as if they were merely putting on a show. Others didn't seem intentional at all, but rather, instinctive reactions, as if they truly found him disgusting, or even dirty. Bai Xiaochun had a hard time not losing his temper, but he continued to remind himself of his purpose in coming here. Just deal with it, he thought, gritting his teeth. After looking around for a while, he still had no idea where Bai Hao lived, and obviously, he couldn't just ask people. The more time passed, the more he became aware of what Bai Hao's life must have been like. Although he had been prepared to be treated poorly, he had never imagined it would be this bad. What exactly is the reason for it all, he thought. At one point as he was walking along, an old man walked out of a temple up ahead. His clothing seemed of better quality than everyone else Bai Xiaochun had seen so far, and he had a foundation establishment cultivation base. Clearly, he was no clan member, but rather, someone who had been hired to serve as a valet. As he walked out, hands clasped behind his back, he prepared to leave, when suddenly he spotted Bai Xiaochun. Then, his eyes widened with surprise before turning extremely grim. Bai Hao, have you forgotten your place? This isn't a place you can just come visit anytime you want. What gall you have, how dare you disregard clan rules? From the way the old man's eyes flashed, and from the impoliteness of his tone, it almost seemed like he was scolding a servant. Up till this point, Bai Xiaochun had simply endured all the dirty looks people had given him. But the fact that this old man actually went so far as to rebuke him caused Bai Xiaochun's anger to rise. However, before he could do anything, the voice of a young woman rang out. Valet Chen, this is the Bai clan, and no matter what your position, you are no member of our clan. What gives a servant like you the right to act so disrespectfully? At this point, a beautiful young woman appeared, hovering in midair. She had an icy expression and a profound cultivation base in the great circle of foundation establishment. Bai Xiaochun looked up at her and simultaneously suppressed his rising anger. The old man's face fell, and his eyes even flickered with a bit of fear. Ducking his head, he clasped hands respectfully toward the young woman. Greetings, fifth young lady. That was just a slip of the tongue by an old servant. However, the clan chief really did establish a rule that bastards are not allowed into the inner residence district unless summoned. The young woman glanced at Bai Xiaochun, sighed, and then turned her attention back to the old man. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. You may not be so disrespectful to a member of the clan. With that, she shook her head and flew off into the distance. Of course, the old man said. However, after she was gone, he looked back at Bai Xiaochun with disgust. You'll escape punishment today because the fifth young lady showed up. Get the hell back to the North District. If I see you around here again, I'll report you to the clan chief. With a cold snort, he flicked his sleeve and walked off. Bai Xiaochun felt like he was about to explode. From the moment he had entered the Bai clan, he had been forced to endure and endure. If things kept going on this way, he wasn't sure if he could keep up the act of being Bai Hao. How did Bai Hao even deal with all this? What would be the point of staying around in a clan like this? Even if he wasn't well liked, it shouldn't be this extreme. There must be more to the story. Well, whatever. I'm not Bai Hao, so I guess I'll just have to deal with it until I get that diva soul. Gritting his teeth and doing his best to suppress his anger, he turned and headed north. It was at that point that he noticed a 7-story pagoda in the middle of a sprawling group of mansions. The 7-story pagoda wasn't very far away, making it easy to see how exquisite it was, glowing like a treasure that illuminated everything around it. That and the restrictive spells that surrounded it indicated that it was a very important place to the Bai clan. As Bai Xiaochun made his way toward the North District, a middle-aged woman stood on a 5th-story balcony of the pagoda, her expression icily sinister as she stared down at him. She wore expensive clothing woven from spirit thread and embroidered with 9 phoenixes, which radiated a soft warmth that indicated it had magical properties designed to enhance a person's good looks. Such clothing was extremely extravagant in the wildlands. Even in the Heavenspan River regions, it would be the type of clothing that only an upper-class woman would wear. Because of it, this woman would be able to maintain her looks even if she were much older than she was now. She was curvaceous, with the fairest of fair skin, and although she couldn't be considered spectacularly beautiful, there was something very enticing about her. Unlike many young beauties, she was not the type who would ever yield to an opponent, and radiated an air of maturity and grace. As she stared at Bai Xiaochun walking toward the North District, she gritted her teeth with the most malicious venom imaginable. A moment later, a man appeared behind her, wearing black clothing and surrounded by a murderous aura. His eyes glowed red, and overall, he looked like an unsheathed sword waiting to strike. As soon as he appeared behind the woman, he clasped hands and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Madam Kai." Madam Kai didn't look back at the man. Keeping her eyes fixed on Bai Xiaochun, she growled, "Didn't you say that the bitch's son, Bai Hao, was dead?" "Yes," the man replied in an icy, confident voice. "I hit the kid with my exterminating soulbrand. His heart and blood vessels were irreparably damaged. Although I teleported him away and wasn't able to personally witness him become a corpse, I can guarantee that he was killed, beyond the shadow of a doubt." Killed beyond the shadow of a doubt? What a wonderful way to put it. Well, take a look over there. Who's that? Erupting in rage-filled laughter, Madam Kai pointed at Bai Xiaochun. The man's eyes widened as he took a few steps forward, following the line of Madam Kai's finger until he was looking at Bai Xiaochun. "Impossible," he said incredulously. "Whether that's really him or not, kill him immediately." With that, Madam Kai turned to leave. The man hesitated for a moment. Although he knew that Madam Kai didn't like Bai Hao, and had been involved in a power struggle with him, he didn't understand why she wanted him dead so urgently. "Madam Kai, killing him won't be hard, but we're in the Bai clan. If I kill him right now, it could be problematic." "That bitch's son isn't even a person," she shrieked. "He's inhuman. Inhuman. I don't care how you do it, just kill him as quickly as possible. He must not be allowed to grow any further." A moment later, she seemed to realize she had lost control. Taking a deep breath, she recovered her composure and walked away without another word. The black-garbed man stood there silently, unsure of exactly what Madam Kai meant when she said inhuman. However, the fact that his target had survived being hit with his exterminating soulbrand was actually a bit intriguing. "I guess this Bai Hao really does have some skill after all," he mused. "I arranged the entire matter, and even delivered the fatal blow myself. And yet somehow, he didn't end up dying. And then he dared to come back. Well, you might have escaped by the skin of your teeth last time, but let's see if you can pull off the same thing again." Chuckling coldly, the man turned to leave. At the same time, he began to pulse with the aura of core formation. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had no way of knowing the details of what had just been said in the pagoda. Because of the incredible restrictive spells which protected it, he wouldn't be able to hear anything unless he was also inside of it. Furthermore, if he attempted to use divine sense to do so, the restrictive spells would detect it and react. However, despite not being able to hear the conversation between the black-garbed man and the middle-aged women, he had seen them clearly, and had detected the ill will and killing intent with which they looked at him. "Well, isn't this interesting?" he murmured to himself. Smiling coldly, he continued on toward the North District. Soon, he came to realize that the North District was far from the city center, and definitely not luxurious. Simple houses filled the entire area, the majority of them occupied by servants who had been attached to the Bai clan for generations. Most of the people present were old, sick, and generally unhealthy looking. The houses seemed scattered about haphazardly, making the entire place seem vastly different from the East District. As Bai Xiaochun walked along, he realized that fewer people were looking at him with scorn and disgust. Considering that this was a poor and simple part of the clan, Bai Xiaochun was further struck by what kind of life Bai Hao must have lived. There were even some people who seemed happy to see him, and stepped forward to greet him with sincere pleasure. This place was definitely very different from the East District. "Big Bro Hao, young Master Hao." Bai Hao was obviously welcome here. Furthermore, he didn't even need to look for his residence. A group of children surrounded him and began to chat happily as they led him to a ramshackle house. It was little more than a hut that seemed like it might collapse into rubble at any moment. Thankfully, the entire Bai clan was protected by a spell formation that prevented the elements from affecting the buildings in the clan, otherwise his hut would have long since been washed away by the rain. After entering the hut, he looked around and sighed. The only thing inside was a bed. There wasn't even a chair present. It seemed almost impossible to believe that an early foundation establishment cultivator would live in a place like this. Whether it was in the wildlands or in the Heavenspan River region, foundation establishment cultivators would always be treated very well no matter where they went. How could Bai Hao end up living like this in his own clan? Although Bai Xiaochun already knew a bit about Bai Hao, he simply couldn't understand the situation. Even though he had been expecting something less than ideal, nothing could have prepared him for this. Either Bai Hao was willing to live like this, or didn't dare to try to change his situation. In that case, who is it that wants him dead? That man and woman from just now? Considering the clothing the woman had been wearing, it was obvious that she occupied a very high position in the clan. However, no amount of pondering brought any insight or clues. He just didn't have enough information. In the end, he shook his head. "I wish I could help you, Bai Hao. But you need to give me something to work with. Help me understand what was going on with you." Sighing, he sat down cross-legged on the dilapidated bed. However, instead of meditating, he sent his divine sense out into the area. He also performed some incantation gestures and prepared to place some restrictive spells in the area that no one but him would notice. This was a practice he had grown accustomed to over the years. Whenever he was in a strange place, the most important thing to do at first was make sure he was safe. However, almost as soon as he sent his divine sense out, a serious expression appeared in his eyes, and his gaze shifted to an area in the corner of the room. Stepping off the couch, he walked over and squatted down to have a closer look. Although this corner of the room looked ordinary in every way, when his divine sense touched it, he could sense the lingering fluctuations of some magical technique. They were faint, as though they had been fading away for months now, and were just about to disappear for good. Were it not for the fact that Bai Xiaochun was currently fused with his 3 clones, quadrupling his divine sense's sensitivity, then he would never have noticed the traces. Although his current divine sense did not have all the powers that nascent soul divine sense did, it was equally acute as that of a nascent soul expert. After examining the location further, Bai Xiaochun's eyes lit up with surprise. Someone used some kind of magic here. It wasn't very long ago, months at most. From the look of things, another type of magic was used later to wipe the ground clean. Erase some evidence of something perhaps. Curiosity growing, Bai Xiaochun opened his heavenspan Dharma eye just a crack, and sent violet light spilling out into the confines of the hut. After looking at the ground using this method, Bai Xiaochun realized that what had been wiped away with magic was most likely some lines of handwritten text. "Interesting," he murmured. Suddenly, several afterimages appeared, which formed into his 3 clones. Each clone opened his third eye a crack, causing 3 more beams of violet light to converge on the same place. Thankfully, Bai Xiaochun knew what he was doing, and prevented any of the violet light from leaving the hut, ensuring that no one on the outside would be able to detect what he was doing. Within moments, the line of text which had been wiped away was restored enough that Bai Xiaochun could read it. Despite the level of his cultivation base and the extent of his mental control, the mere sight of the text caused him to let out a yelp of surprise. That's, what is fire?" According to my studies, mundane fire is not a physical substance like water. Instead, it is a reflection of something that can't be seen with either the naked eye or divine sense. Fire is similar to an aura, a mixture of something illusory and something miraculous. The only reason you can see it is because of the glow of light that results from its existence. Multicolored flame is the same. In that case, a new question arises. What are souls? And why do souls produce multicolored flame? By this point Bai Xiaochun was panting, and his eyes were as wide as saucers as he stared at the writing. Although only a portion of it was still visible, even the little bit he could read left him completely reeling. At the same time, the feeling of enlightenment left him gasping. This. He had never imagined that someone would study fire in this way, research it in such detail. Based on how the words were written, it seemed that the person who had left them behind had just been casually writing down their thoughts. Most importantly, in addition to the waves of shock which pounded at Bai Xiaochun's heart and mind as he looked at the words, they opened a new door to him. By combining what he was reading with his current understanding of how to conjure flame, he suddenly felt as if he were gaining significant enlightenment. That's right, this is exactly what I've experienced when conjuring my own flame. Fire is not a physical substance like water, but rather, a reflection of something else. Or perhaps, a symbol. In many senses, it is illusory, and not material like water is. Bai Xiaochun did his best to keep his calm, but it was almost impossible. From what he could tell, the person who had left these words behind was extraordinary, and had almost unparalleled enlightenment regarding the nature of flame. In that regard, this person was almost like a diva. Furthermore, considering that he could already conjure 11-colored flame, this writing left him in even more profound anticipation of conjuring 12-colored flame. Based on this new information, and his own previous research and analysis, he was confident that he could succeed. Never could Bai Xiaochun have imagined that he would stumble across such good fortune here. Drawing upon his cultivation base, he poured more power into his heaven-span Dharma eye and continued reading. As he did, he continued to reel with shock. And that was especially true when he reached the end of the text and realized that it contained speculations about the formula for 15-colored flame. After looking over much of that information, Bai Xiaochun was completely shaken. How is this possible? Dumbfounded, he stared at the final lines of writing. Fire can be incredibly hot, and has mystical power. When that heat and that power combine, they form an outer flame, an inner flame, and a flame heart. My special augury method has not yet produced the formula for 15-colored flame. However, making the final calculations shouldn't be difficult. After that, 16-colored flame and 17-colored flame shouldn't be much of a challenge. In fact, I'm even confident that my augury can produce the formula for 20-colored flame. Unfortunately, my cultivation base is too low. Even if I produced the formula, it wouldn't do me any good. I wouldn't be able to conjure the flame. However, I still want to make the formula. I'll show it to Father to finally prove to him that I'm not useless. I am good for something. I'm not interested in fighting with anyone else in the clan for position. I just want Father to notice me. Within those final words, Bai Xiaochun could sense both wild confidence and profound self-deprecation. I can't believe he made his own augury method to produce multicolored flame formulas. Sighing, he rose to his feet and used his heaven-span Dharma eye to search the entire hut. After searching the entire place several times, his anxiety began to mount. It was obvious that at some point in the past, the entire floor had been covered with notes about flame conjuring. However, at some point, most of the notes had been wiped away by some unknown method. Clearly, they had been erased by a person. The formula for 15-colored flame. Bai Xiaochun thought. There was no way for him to remain unmoved by this development. Furthermore, if Bai Hao did not write the notes, then how did they end up in his residence? If Bai Hao wrote them, then considering the level of his cultivation base, he had obviously achieved astonishing enlightenment of flame conjuring. In fact, his abilities far surpassed Bai Xiaochun's. Wait a second, that can't be right. If Bai Hao was really that good, he could just reveal his skills and achieve a monumental rise in the Bai clan. Why would he allow himself to be treated the way he was? Bai Xiaochun scratched his head and thought for a bit, but couldn't come up with any explanations. He stood up and began to pace back and forth in the room, and after a long moment passed, his eyes suddenly began to shine brightly. Whether or not Bai Hao wrote these notes doesn't matter. What's important is that the complete set of notes contains the formula for 15-colored flame. In that case, whoever erased the notes is Bai Hao's killer, or at least, is connected to the killer. Therefore, the killer is likely the one who possesses the complete set of notes. If I want to get those notes, I probably don't have to do anything. The killer or killers will come looking for me to cause trouble. After all, my return has most likely sparked their killing intent. In fact, if I make a stir in the Bai clan, it will probably make them accelerate their plans. In turn, that would give me more clues to follow to get those notes. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered as he made his decision. Looking down at the remnants of the notes on the floor, he sighed. Bai Hao really had things rough. I feel bad for him. He shook his head. By this point, he was fairly certain that Bai Hao had been the one to write all of the notes. However, I still need some confirmation. Pulling out a jade slip, he sent a message to Li Feng and asked him to secretly start making inquiries about Bai Hao. Of course, Li Feng didn't know that Bai Xiaochun was impersonating Bai Hao, and therefore, excitedly set about following orders. As far as he was concerned, this was a good opportunity to show off. Intentionally keeping Zhou Yixing in the dark, he started calling on his own network of friends and informants to try to get information. A few days later, he told Bai Xiaochun all of the information he had been able to dig up on Bai Hao. When Bai Xiaochun saw it, his eyes flashed with anger. Based on the information he had gleaned from Bai Hao's bone slips, as well as Bai Xiaochun's experiences in the clan already, he now had a good idea of what type of person Bai Hao had been. His mother had been a servant girl with no position in the clan, whereas his father was the current clan chief. In a particularly violent and humiliating incident in which his mother had no control over her own body, Bai Hao was conceived, and became a bastard son of the Bai clan. He had a very low position from the moment he was born. Furthermore, it wasn't long after he came into the world that his mother was killed. If Bai Hao had possessed sufficient latent talent, things might have turned out differently for him. However, he wasn't talented when it came to cultivation, and no matter how hard he worked, was never able to excel. His father's first wife was none other than Madame Kai, who occupied a very high position in the clan. In fact, she came from the Kai clan, another of the three great clans that were attached to Giant Ghost City. There was another factor at play. Madame Kai's son was Bai Hao's older brother, Bai Qi. He was insufferably proud, and was famous throughout all of Giant Ghost City. He was already in the great circle of core formation, and had attracted the attention of the Bai clan patriarch, who viewed him as the Qilin son of the clan, the type which only came along once every few hundred years. In fact, Bai Qi was to represent the Bai clan in their attempt to secure the legacy of the Hell Emperor. Family like that made Bai Hao's life even more bitter than it might have been. His father treated him with cold aloofness that made it seem as if they weren't related, and apparently didn't even care whether Bai Hao lived or died. His father's first wife hated him, and his older brother was completely condescending, treating Bai Hao as if he were a servant. Eventually, Bai Hao came to be viewed as the lowest of the low within the clan. Everyone was afraid of getting on Madame Kai and Bai Qi's bad side, and therefore, not even the servants were willing to have much dealings with Bai Hao. Furthermore, from the time he was in Qi condensation, his progress had always been indescribably slow. Thankfully, Bai Hao was the type of person who could deal with all of that. He put on a front of looking weak and cowardly, and always just bowed his head and shivered when people berated him. Eventually, people stopped paying much attention to him. Few people even remembered that he had a hut of his own in the North District. It had only been recently that he finally broke through into the foundation establishment stage. Shortly afterward, he went missing. By the time Bai Xiaochun finished reading all the information in the jade slip Li Feng had sent to him, his anger was burning hot. He almost couldn't reconcile the information within the slip with the young man he had seen out in the jungle. Who cares if he looked weak and cowardly? If I were in his position, that's what I would have done to stay alive. If he had shown any signs of being extraordinary, he would have been a threat, and would definitely have been killed. In fact, it was right after he made a cultivation base breakthrough that he died. And yet, merely having a foundation establishment cultivation base doesn't seem like enough to make him a threat to anyone. Then he looked down at the ground, and suddenly, came to a realization. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.